Welcome to Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com. I'm your host, Shannon Skinner. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with author Marina Nemat, whose first book, her memoir, Prisoner of Tehran, chronicles her arrest, torture, and 2-year imprisonment as a teenager in the infamous Evin prison in Iran during the 1980s, evolutionary Iran in the 1980s. Her story has touched many, many lives around the world, including mine. And in fact, there's a movie being made about her story based on her book. Her new book, After Terhan, which I'll show it here, there's a cover of it, tells a story of how she escaped Iran with her husband and infant child and made their way to Canada through Hungary, and how she has overcome and dealt with survivor's guilt. And stay tuned, because at the end of this very first segment, and before we take a break, we'll have our Good to Know Minute, where I invite our guests to provide their top tip on living a successful life, and you will hear from Marina at that time, so stay tuned. Marina, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Shannon.
It's an honor.
No, the honor is mine. Thank you for having me.
Now, your first book focuses on the early years of your life. What was it like growing up in Iran in the 1980s during that time, the time of the revolution?
Before the revolution, life was very surprisingly normal compared to the Western standards. So when I was younger, before the 79 revolution, I lived in downtown Tehran, very similar to downtown Toronto. A lot of traffic, a lot of high rises, a lot of people shopping, haggling with vendors, and just going about their daily business. Women wore whatever they wanted on the streets of Tehran. If they wanted to wear mini skirts and tight t-shirts, which was the fashion at the time, they could. Maybe in my neighborhood, maybe 3% of women wore the hijab at the time. So it was relatively, from the eyes of a young girl growing up, not from the eyes of a politician or something, but from the eyes of a young girl growing up, it seemed to be a free place that you could wear what you wanted, you could go out dancing, you could go out with your boyfriend. I went to a wonderful girls' school, and I wanted to study to become a medical doctor. Women could become whatever they wanted. They could become judges. They could become the prime minister if they wanted to. So the possibilities seemed endless. I had the same hopes and dreams of any Western girl. I danced to the tunes of the Bee Gees. I watched the Donnie and Marie Osmond show. I watched the Little House on the Prairie. So it was normal. And then the revolution happened. When the revolution happened, I think Iran was a house of cards that just came down. And it took a lot of lives with it. So as you might imagine, when we say revolution, I'm sure people have studied different revolutions in school, but seeing it and studying about it are definitely two very different issues. There was a lot of violence on the street. As you might imagine, there were shootings, there were people yelling and screaming and demanding democracy and freedom, and then there were the soldiers that were chasing people, and there was tear gas and tires burning, and then the schools were shut down, and everybody was in a limbo for a very long time. And then it succeeded. The Shah left, Khomeini came, and it was a brand new order.
Now, you were arrested at the age of 16 for what they believed, or what they deemed at the time was your political beliefs. But you were just a young girl doing what every young girl does, watching Donny Osmond.
Exactly. I wasn't really arrested for my political beliefs because I didn't have any political beliefs. I think at the age of 16, what any educated young woman who feels responsible about the world, about others, about making the world a better place is to help. is to help out friends and the society and the country and everything. And I was just that, in school, everything was changing really quickly. Our wonderful teachers had been replaced by by members of the Revolutionary Guard, young women who were just there to implement the Iranian Cultural Revolution. And it was painful because instead of maths and sciences and geography and history and literature, which I loved, there was now only political propaganda from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. We had to now wear the hijab in school. Like, I was the Donny Osmond Bee Gees miniskirt generation. Now I had to cover up. You're kidding me, right? So we protested. Not only me, a lot of girls in my school. We protested, we spoke out, we said, we don't want to wear this. We want our masks, we want our sciences back. And you know what? All of us got in trouble.
Were you afraid to protest at that time?
Not at all. Because we were the generation of the revolution, and the revolution was young. When the revolution came into power, it promised the people of Iran freedom and democracy. So we assumed that because it promised freedom and democracy, well, things didn't look like freedom and democracy. But because it had been promised, and because we had watched people die on the streets for that promised freedom and democracy, we felt entitled to it. We were the generation of the revolution, and we wanted what we had asked for, and they were not giving it to us. So we felt empowered. We felt like we could rise and we could fix everything, but we were wrong because nobody expected the level of brutality of the new government. It became something that nobody had foreseen really in any way.
And here you were, a young girl who loved to read. You would go to a secondhand bookstore, to a man named, I believe, Albert, who owned it, and you loved your books. You lived a life that you were sheltered at the time prior to the revolution. Why teenagers? I mean, they did arrest many teenagers at that time.
It is really deviously intelligent if you think about it. Put yourself in the shoes of a dictator. Okay, let's have this fictional scenario. Shannon is now going to run Canada and she's a dictator. Okay, let's have this fictional story. Now, what do you think is the best way to control a country? Do you start from 50-year-olds? From 40-year-olds? They are pretty set in their ways, and in just a few years they are going to retire and they are going to be out of the game. If you want to control the future of Canada, you need the high school students.
So to control your country, you control your youth.
You do, because they are the future, they are the heart of the matter. And if you arrest the teenagers, you also control their parents. They become your slaves. They would do anything to save their children.
Well, I would imagine it would be a terrifying experience for a parent to see their child be taken to prison.
It was devastating. Whenever my parents came to visit me in the prison, they were bawling their eyes out. And, all of us, the girls, the prisoners, we all had a straight face. We never cried in front of them. We always said we were okay. But they were devastated because they knew at any moment they could get a phone call that would tell them we had been executed. And they knew there was torture and there was rape in prison. They knew quite nobody ever talked about it, but everybody knew.
So they kept quiet. Nobody really wanted to deal with it, I suppose.
You can't, because if you talk about it, you're going to be arrested as well. Imagine if during the Nazi, in Nazi Germany, when Hitler came into power and he started, collecting Jews and sending them to concentration camps, if somebody stood up and said, "Hey, wait a second, what are you doing?" What do you think would have happened to that person? There were a lot of people, a lot of average German citizens who stood up to it, who spoke out, who hid the Jews. But what happened to them?
Now, you, while you were in prison, you married the man who was your interrogator, and it was a secret. How did that affect you at that time?
You have to understand that Evin prison is an empire on its own. So you have Iran, you have Tehran, and then in north of Tehran you have Evin. These are relatively different realms. Of course, they coexist and they kind of, well, of course they interact with each other, but Evin has always had its own set of rules, its laws, its leaders, its power. It has its own army of guards that protect it. And these people can get away with anything. They do anything, and they do not have to answer to anybody. In Evin prison, you have to also consider that Iran is an Islamic country. It is, the law is based on Sharia law. So raping a woman, you cannot get away with it. Raping a woman is against Sharia law. But there are shortcuts. So if you want to rape somebody in the prison, let's say a guard wants to rape a woman.
And of course, you're referring to your own, of course, this is what happened to you.
This is what happened to me, and it happened to a lot of other girls. So it wasn't only me. The Sharia judge, who's a mullah, a clergyman, he would come and he would perform a very brief marriage ceremony. Now, there are two kinds of marriage in Shia Islam. There is a regular marriage that you exchange your vows forever. It is considered complete marriage. But there's another kind, which is temporary marriage. You can marry somebody for half an hour, for an hour, for 2 hours, and the ceremony takes 30 seconds. So all you need, if a guard wants to rape a prisoner, is to have a Sharia judge say something for 30 seconds, and then it's legal. Now, exactly how many girls were married off to guards, whether as temporary marriages or as full-time, complete, the way I was married off to Ali Musabi, my interrogator in Evin prison, as a complete marriage. But there were other girls.
But this was really against your will.
I was 17 years old and I was a prisoner. I don't know, what girl in her sane mind at the age of 17 would even consider sleeping with somebody who has had hand in her torture. That is just beyond human tolerance. In any way you might think about it, is devastating, to put it the least. If I were to choose between torture and that, I would take torture anytime, because when you're being tortured, it is horrible. Torture destroys the human soul. But at the same time, you are in a position of power. In a very weird, funny way, you are in a position of power.
How would you be in a position of power when you have,
Because you know that you're a threat to them.
Interesting.
And that they are retaliating against you. That doesn't save you, okay? Because the pain is so devastating. It's so horrible that nothing is left of you at the end. But when it ends, there is a sense of dignity still. Because when it ends, you realize they did this to me because they're afraid of me, but I'm still me. I'm still me. But when they rape you, it's almost like robbing you from your dignity. Everything is gone, There's the pain, but there's the humiliation. You almost feel like an animal that is worth nothing whatsoever. And that feeling of helplessness is just beyond. If there's anything left of you after torture, the rape part just destroys it entirely.
And so you were forced to marry Ali because otherwise he...
My family would be arrested.
He threatened to arrest your family.
Yeah, they do it all the time. Mm-hmm. They do arrest family members if you don't comply. If they cannot find you, if they're after you and they go to your house and you're not there, they will take your family and they will say, come give yourself up. Once you give yourself up, we let your family go. There were many people in Evin prison who were just there because of family members. So it wasn't unusual. Today it is not unusual. Still, people in Iran are being arrested not because of what they have done, but because of their family members.
And here you are now living in Canada.
Yep.
What a different world.
It is.
Now, it's the end of our first segment, so we have our Good to Know Minute where I invite our guests to give their top tip on living a successful life. And Marina, you have a top tip.
Well, I don't know if my life is successful. I don't know how you measure a successful life, but I would say don't get discouraged. So it doesn't matter what the world says. If you believe in something, go on with it.
Don't get discouraged. We'll take a break, and after the break, we'll learn more. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women. I'm Shannon Skinner, and we are here speaking with Marina Nemat, the author of Prisoner of Tehran and her new book, After Tehran, and we are here to speak to her about her life story and her new book. Just before the break, we were talking a little bit about your background, having grown up in Iran, your imprisonment, your marriage that you had kept secret, the torture, and then you had left. Eventually, you were able to leave prison. How did that come to be?
My first husband's, Ali Musavi's family, the guard whom I had been forced to marry, they were really good people. They were just your average family that they believed that this revolution was really protecting their way of life. Excuse me. And I respected that because they were good people. Excuse me. They were really good, kind people, and they never did anything mean to me whatsoever. They were always generous and welcoming in any way they could. Of course, they couldn't change my situation, but in that context, they were really nice. So they secured my release. They bribed my way out of the prison. They talked my way out of the prison, because in Iran, there's no rule of law. If you know the right people, and if you know whom to bribe, you get your way. So they got me out, and they just opened the prison doors after 2 years, 2 months, and 12 days that I had been in prison, and they said, go home.
So in the meantime, Ali had been killed, your husband had been killed, which really freed you in a way.
Well, I don't know. Things could still have really gone wrong, because the prosecutor of Tehran, the warden of Evin prison, Asadullah Lajavardi, he officially wanted to marry me off to another guard. Like it was really in the works. And Ali's family stopped that. They said, no, she is our daughter, and she is going home. So they fought for it for 6 months. It is still after his death. It took 6 months of back and forth and negotiating and bribing to finally get me out of the prison. So it took a while.
Now, in your book, in both books, you do write that prison had changed your life. You'd since written your first book, and then, of course, your second one most recently. But how has your life changed since writing Prisoner of Terhan?
When I wrote Prisoner, I was not thinking at all about consequences, because, when you live in Evin prison for 2 years, when you watch your friends die by firing squad, when you are tortured and raped, and basically you're taken apart cell by cell, that becomes the heart of who you are, even if you are in denial, even if you want to forget it, even if you want to bury it in a very deep hole and cover it with a lot of dirt and just plant flowers over it, it still doesn't work. So that was the truth. And when I finally, my bubble burst, and I realized that, you know what, you cannot keep this buried in the ground, because it's going to take you with it. That was when I wrote Prisoner. And I never thought about consequences, because it didn't matter. Because even if this book caused somebody to come and shoot me on the street, I didn't care. I really, really didn't care. It didn't matter. It was nothing. So the point was to get the story known, to tell the world what had happened. And that is the heart of who I am. So whatever came after, I was completely unprepared for it. And I basically took it day by day. I had to go on an extended book tour of Europe, United States, Canada, everywhere. I have spoken for thousands, really thousands of people in person, like not only through the media, but I have spoken to people, to universities, to high schools, to different kinds of events, conferences, all over the world. So basically what happened was that I took it day by day. And it has been, and it is today as we speak, a learning experience. The more you travel the world, the more you talk to people, the more you realize how much you don't know. And the more you realize the value of speaking out and of sharing what you feel is important and that it can save lives. I value every single life that could be lost because of injustice.
What has been maybe the greatest lesson that you've learned since writing the book?
Never surrender to silence. Silence is your worst enemy by far, by anything else. Because when you succumb to silence, you become an accomplice of the crime. If you watch a woman raped on a street and you walk away and never tell anybody about it, what does that make you? An accomplice. An accomplice of the crime. If you see a crime or something unjust, anything, if something is done to you or to anybody else and you witness it, and then you keep it to yourself because you're afraid of what they might think about you, because you're afraid of what somebody might do to you, because you're just simply afraid or ashamed or anything like that, then you are becoming an accomplice. So consider that.
So I'm going to read an excerpt from your new book. I pushed my memories into a dark corner of my mind where they would remain dormant for many years. I became a prisoner of silence. We just talked about silence. Silence is seems to be a theme through your books. You know, you spent a lot of silence in solitary confinement in those 2 years when you were in prison. The Revolutionary Guards silencing you, the government silencing, keeping silent your stories from family and from friends. Today, in moments of silence, what goes through Marina Nemat's mind?
I have rare moments of silence. You know, I really have to admit that they are rare. You know, for me right now, silence is only a way to find the words I need to say. So I love to pray and to meditate. Unfortunately, I cannot do much of that when I'm home or when I'm traveling, and you know, because I'm always with people, always talking to people, always writing, so there's rarely silence. But for example, when I was in France recently, I was there to give talks, and then a friend of mine who lives there, she took me to an island of monks, and there, that island is a place of silence. But it is the kind of, it's a different kind of silence. It's a peaceful kind of silence that actually helps you find yourself. It is not an imposing silence. It is something you choose. It is not something that is just pushed upon you and that holds you captive. It is something that actually helps you continue your journey.
Why do you think that your story has touched so many lives around the world? What is it about it?
Honestly, I think probably because I get all these emails from, a lot of times some of these emails, they come and I can't even tell what language they're in. So I have to Google and first find out what language is this so that then I can use the Google translator and translate it. But I think it is because every human being has suffered in one way or another. And in my humble opinion, there is no measurement for suffering. Like, how can we say if I suffered more or you suffered more? It's just impossible. So I think people can relate to that sense of suffering and to the silence that keeps you a victim and the possibility of breaking free. I think that is the kind of encouragement that people need to know, that you can actually break free from all of it, let the world know, and fight back.
So you were arrested, you were tortured, you were raped, you were forced to marry someone against your will. You had to leave your homeland. How do you deal day to day with what had happened?
Well, I think a very important thing is the fact that I have an outlet. So, because what happened to me has not ended. What happened to me is still going on in Iran, in Evin prison, in all prisons is still happening. So that is important to remember. That is really, really important. So my suffering in a way continues, because as long as there is even one prisoner in Iran or in Evin prison, I feel responsible for it, and I need to bring it to an end or my life would be meaningless. So these are facts I have to live with, but of course it gets very heavy at times. So that is when I just take little breaks. You know, I love to go for walks. I love flowers. I love poetry. You know, you have to give yourself breathing room, because if you don't, the stress becomes impossible to handle. So you have to pace yourself.
Why, Marina, do you feel responsible for the girls in prison?
Because I'm a witness. A witness, as I told you, becomes an accomplice if she or he doesn't do anything about it. Now, of course, writing is important, speaking out is important, but these are all efforts. You know, this is the fight, the battle that we are fighting. You know, I would really like to see it succeed. You know, we have talked about success, about my being a successful writer, but I'm not successful until the regime in Iran falls. And until Iran is a free country, I am not successful in any way.
Well, we are due for a little break, so we're going to take a quick one, and I'm fascinated to talk some more to you, Marina. We'll be back in just a minute. Back to Extraordinary Women. I'm Shannon Skinner, and we are here speaking to Marina Nemat, author of the memoir Prisoner of Tehran, and her new book, After Tehran, A Life Reclaimed. And in fact, I'll just show it again so we can take a look. And we'll talk about a bit more about the book in detail in the last segment. But now, today, you are traveling the world, speaking to groups, women's groups, to high schools, churches. You speak all over the world about, really about your experience. What message do you have, really, particularly for women out there who are experiencing trauma?
Well, unfortunately, there are many people out there, not only women, men, children, everybody, who are experiencing trauma. Here in Canada, we live in a bubble. In the West, we live in a bubble. And the rest of the world is reality, is where there's no justice, is where there's no rule of law, and is where people suffer tremendously in ways that if we read about it, we would think it's fiction. We would think it's a horror movie. But it is the reality. Right now, there's a woman in Iran, for example, Sakina Mohammadi Ashtiani, who is sentenced to death by stoning. One day they say they're going to stone her, the other they say, no, we're going to hang her. So basically, she's between being hanged or being stoned. Now,
or lashed.
Well, she has been lashed already. You know, I think the psychological torture of this, of having to live with it day in, day out, is just beyond belief. So, you know, I am considering where I come from, I am very familiar with the plight of the women in the East, in the Middle East, women who could get stoned because of adultery, you know, something that here in the West, you know, is nothing, you know, it's not even a crime. So there are many of these women out there, and we don't even know their names. Now with Sakine, her story got out. Her children wrote a letter to people in the world, and, you know, they asked for help. So now we know about her. But there are many like her, not only in Iran, in other countries, women who basically have no rights whatsoever. And I understand them. I know where they come from, and I feel that it is my duty to help them. You know, the key issue for these women, when I was in prison, one of the things that was the most difficult for me was that I really felt that the world had forgotten us. So that the girls in Evin prison, the world didn't know, or the world didn't care. Because when you witness that kind of brutality, that kind of senseless brutality, and then every day the sun comes up and it goes down and nothing changes, after a while you think, oh, so they don't care.
And in terms of brutality, I mean, you're talking about not only your torture, but the torture of other girls. And
everybody.
Many of your friends, or at least some of your friends, were executed.
That's right.
While you were in prison.
That's right. So when you witness things like that, I think the most difficult part of it is that the world doesn't care. So we have to show these women that we care. Now, how can we show them? We have to speak out for them. Like right now, there is a petition. There are actually a few petitions online on behalf of Sakineh Mohammadi Ashtani. Now, when we say Sakineh, she's not only one person. She's the representative of the condition of women in that part of the world. So by signing that petition, you're not only supporting Sakineh, you're supporting a cause, the cause of freedom of women in the Middle East. That's what you're doing, and it matters. You know, right now we have more than 300,000 signatures on the website, but Lady Gaga gets 10 million hits. Why don't we have 10 million hits for Sakineh Mohammadi Ashtani? Is it because the world doesn't care? That is my question. So my job is to remind the world and to ask it, to beg it to care, because that caring can change the situation of these women.
So you've gone from so many years of silence to being this big, massive voice around the world.
I guess that's what happens. You know, when you want to silence something, it actually blows up. So I guess this is what happened.
What are some of the stories you must have when you're speaking, you know, around the world? You must have women, in particular, who come up and share their personal stories with you.
They do.
What is that like for you?
You know, I just feel so blessed when that happens, because that means that these women, they trust me. Once this young girl at a school, you know, after everybody else had gone, she stayed. She was standing in the background. She was looking at me. And when everybody left, she came to me and she whispered in my ear. She said, "How did you deal with it? I don't know how to deal with it. I don't trust men anymore." So I told her, listen, there are good men out there. I'm married to one of them.
Andre, your husband?
Yes. And I said, because there are some men who are bad, and I know one of them or maybe more did wrong to you, that doesn't mean that they are all like that. So give it a chance. Give yourself time to heal, and then look for a good man out there who can be your friend, who can be your partner, who can maybe one day be your husband. Give it the benefit of the doubt.
These women, do they seek further support from you, or?
They do. I'm in email contact. You know, I'm not a psychologist. So the first thing I tell them is that they have to talk to somebody. And all of the girls that I'm in contact with, all of these cases, they have already been brought to, you know, the courts, or, you know, to the proper authorities. So I will first make sure that somebody out there knows about this, knows about what happened. So as long as that's that, you know, I think the fact that I'm not a psychologist, the fact that I'm not really an authority figure, the fact that I'm just a woman out there, just a writer who's just telling the story.
A successful writer.
Well, makes them comfortable. You know, makes them, you know, when they communicate with me, I'm not their therapist, I'm just a friend. So I think just having that possibility to talk about things that they know makes other people uncomfortable but doesn't make me uncomfortable, just that, I think it helps them on their journey of healing. And giving them that possibility is an absolute blessing.
Now, after your release, you married the man who you are now married to today, Andre, who you left Iran and moved to Canada with, and you have 2 boys.
Yes.
So you're a mother, you are a writer, you are an activist, you are a public speaker.
Yes, and you know, I do all the things that, you know, other women do. You know, this morning I lost my keys and it took me forever to find them. And you know, it gets hectic, it gets difficult. You're juggling so many things, so your memory goes, and you have to make, you know, sticky notes and put them everywhere. So, you know, we all have our challenges, and I think as long as you believe in what you're doing, as long as you have faith that this is what you were born for, that this is the purpose of your life, then that energy keeps you going.
Now, if you had the opportunity to live your life all over again, to do it all over again, would you change anything?
I will not. Because you have to remember that it is so easy to sit here in Canada today and say, well, if I were, I should have done, if what, and all of those question marks that come in. But now, as a 45-year-old woman sitting here, I have a lot more experience than the 16-year-old. You cannot expect the 16-year-old to behave as a 45-year-old. That's just against the way life works. That's against the way we have been programmed to live our lives. We have a process that we have to go through it the way we go through it, and it would be cheating to go back, and it's just impossible. So I think it is ridiculous to sit down after the fact and to say, oh, I should have done this, oh, I should have done that. Well, you didn't. I didn't do it perfectly when I made a lot of mistakes. I did things that maybe if it happened today, maybe, I can't say for sure, maybe I would do differently. But back then, according to what I knew, according to my experience, this is the best I came up with. And I'm okay with that.
And now, of course, your mom had passed away a few years ago.
10 years ago.
Oh. And your father,
He's fine. I was actually visiting my dad yesterday, and he looked great. He's 88 years old, so I try to visit him once a week, and I take him for his doctor's appointment, for his, when you're 88, he's in very good health, and he doesn't have amnesia or anything. But, at the age of 88, you do need, he lives by himself, he's independent, but he does need some help. And my brother and I, we both try to visit him at least once a week and to make sure that he's okay, that he has everything he needs, and that sort of thing.
So and your brother lives here in Toronto as well?
Yep, he does. And he's a great guy. And, just together, we just try to do as much as we can for our father.
Did you get support from your friends and family after the release of your first book? Terhan?
Well, after the book was released, it took them a while to deal with all of that information. It was hard for them. It took a while, I would say a few months at least, to talk things over. To have, for them to suddenly be facing a reality they had been running away from for so long, it was difficult. So it was a process, and everybody took part and everybody did their best. So today, I think we are all much happier, much more at peace, much more at ease than I dare say we have ever been.
Well, it's time for a break, and I want to hear more. Absolutely. I'm so fascinated, Marina. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and after we come back, we'll talk a bit more about Marina's new book. Welcome back to Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com. I'm Shannon Skinner, and we're here speaking with Marina Nemat, author of Prisoner of Tehran, and her new book, just out, After Tehran, A Life Reclaimed. It's a lovely picture. What inspired you to write a follow-up book to your first memoir, which is really what this is?
Yes, it is. I had no plan of writing another nonfiction. Like, if somebody had told me, I would have laughed at it right after Prisoner of Terhan came out. But then when I went on a book tour, which, by the way, has not really ended because, I was traveling, then now another book tour. So it's all, like I never stopped traveling for the first book. As I was traveling, I wouldn't be joking if I say every single reporter, and we are talking probably into the hundreds of people who have interviewed me or have asked me questions in the audience, every single time I was asked, why did you wait 20 years to write this book? And I was just, my jaw dropped open. I was like, really? Do you think that a girl who is taken out of an ordinary average life, thrown into a political prison, tortured, raped, and watches her friends die, and then goes home, can just sit down and write about it? Like, that, I just fail to see how would anybody think that you can do that. It's just impossible. So you need a buffer zone.
Why would it be impossible?
Because you're traumatized. Because you're entirely traumatized. Some people call it the post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever you want to call it, you are in a state of shock, and you remain there. Depending, some people, get over it sooner. Some people get over it later. But there is a very serious need for time to. Healing is not the right word. I would say to deal with it, to face it, because as a victim you run in the other direction. You try to pretend that it never happened. The world tries to pretend it never happened. Your family tries to pretend it never happened. Basically everybody avoids it. So you need time to catch up with what happened, because one day your mind is going to travel back and you won't be able to stop it. So when that time comes, you need time to digest. You need time to digest. So in order to sit down and write about it, especially issues like this, issues that are ongoing, issues that are still hot topic today, these are difficult, even more difficult, because they suddenly even become political. Even though they are very personal, they also become political. So you are taking chances. You're taking a lot of risks as you get out there. And you speak about something that hasn't really ended, it's still ongoing. So it is difficult. And that was when I realized that Prisoner of Tehran was unfinished. Basically, it needed another volume to it. It needed me to tell the people, okay, I had told what happened, but as a victim, when what happened to you ends, you don't end. You continue existing. So I had to talk about that existence that follows the event, that follow up to the trauma. And how do you deal with the trauma? How does your family deal with the trauma? How does the world deal with the trauma? So all of these are important issues that are not only important to me, I believe they are important to every victim out there who has suffered. So this was why I decided to write another book. I really felt it was crucial to follow up.
So how would you describe this book, your new book?
This book is about facing trauma and speaking out about it, dealing with it, and fighting to make things better. Because again, as I said, when what happened to you is an ongoing problem, it is a huge problem, it is a vast problem, you need to fight it, or your own personal trauma will never end.
Now, in this book, I thought it was really interesting how you wrote it. Each chapter, you've written, you've taken a piece of a material or an item that's has importance to you, and you would put it in your mind. You'd put it in a suitcase that you would take into the afterlife. How did you come up with this idea?
Oh, I am a very organic writer. I don't plan things ahead. I just basically start at a certain point in time and I just let it happen. So one thing leads to the other, leads to the other. And as a non-fiction writer, life is messy. So, when you're a fiction writer, you can organize things much more easily because you're creating them. But when you're writing nonfiction, you have to follow life. So you cannot just, change things the way they suit you, or to make the structure better. You cannot change the facts. So the only thing you can do in nonfiction is you can move them back and forth. That's what you can do, really. So as I was writing, a part of the book is really about dreams and nightmares, because nightmares are a part of that. When you get out of trauma, you get nightmares, you get flashbacks. So a part of the book is, deals with those nightmares and flashbacks. Now, one of the dreams, I don't call it a nightmare, but one of the dreams I've been having all the time is, because I travel a lot too and I always take carry-on. So I have my orange carry-on, little suitcase on wheels, and I'm dragging it all the way around with me, and I'm going everywhere, and I'm putting things in it. And I know that I'm packing for the other world. I'm basically preparing myself for death, and I'm putting all these items. So a lot of times I don't even remember what those items were. Sometimes I do. So when I actually wrote the book, it wasn't even divided into chapters, really. Or it was, but not anything similar to what it is now. And then I thought, okay, I need a thread to go through the book, to connect all of these scattered events together. And that was when that dream, I remembered the dream, and I thought, well, that makes a lot of sense, because this book is really about the story of those items.
Now, what are the items?
Well, there are some odd
some
ones.
Examples?
Yeah, like, my grandmother's jewelry box is definitely one of them. My mother used to crochet tablecloths, so one of those tablecloths. There are folic acid supplements. Now, don't ask me why, because you'll have to read the book. I know it's really weird. There's a broken umbrella in there. I have a pair of yellow-red slippers.
Rosary.
There are a lot of things in there.
Canadian passport.
Oh, definitely Canadian passport. I have a dragonfly brooch that, that is in there, a Persian song, some lists that, again, the significance of these, the poem, the significance of all these items becomes clear as you read the book, because each one of these items, are not just items, they tell stories. They contain a lot of memories.
Now, in some cases, these items are items you've had, you've kept, or you've thrown out, or they may not be in your life any longer, just maybe in your mind.
The items that this book is based on, I have them all. I didn't write in this book about the ones I don't have. In a way, the ones I don't have are all covered in Prisoner of Tehran. That's interesting, even though Prisoner of Terhan the chapters were not based on items. But after I wrote this one and I structured it the way it is, I thought about all the items in Prisoner of Terhan, and they are there. The items are there. And those are the ones that I either buried or threw out or did something to them, the ones that I don't have anymore.
You talk about your grandmother's little silver box.
Yes.
That she would, after she passed away, she kept it. Actually, it was a gift from her
husband who was killed. Yes, my dad actually has a jewelry box right now, and I have been trying to gather courage to tell him, Dad, I want a box, but so far I haven't been able to, because it's basically the only thing he has left from his mother. So I thought it would be cruel to ask him to give it to me. But
you used to keep sugar in it.
There's still sugar in it. There's still sugar in it. It's on my dad's dining room table, and every time I go there, it's there, and I do want it.
The flashbacks. Now, this is something that I understand that people with post-secondary stress syndrome often have, and sometimes it is delayed. And in your case, your flashbacks to those events in your during your imprisonment were delayed. Is that correct?
Yes, they were. I have talked to psychologists, to psychiatrists, and one of them, actually two of them, are in the book here, Dr. Rosemary Meyer and Dr. Donald Payne, who have become good friends. And I have talked and discussed these issues with them, and they have explained to me that yes, indeed, because I thought I was just not normal, even in the abnormal sense of way. So I talked to them, and they say it's actually quite normal for people who go through traumatic experience to show no symptoms whatsoever immediately following the event, but many years later the symptoms begin to appear if these people are not treated. So if you go through a traumatic experience and you're not treated immediately, the symptoms of the psychological disorder, they might appear many years later.
And now, of course, you mentioned in your book how Facebook has enabled you to connect with at least one friend that you were in prison with.
With many, actually. There is only the story of one of those friends in there, because it was just so important for me. Finding her, finding everyone was important, but just the fact that I thought she was dead, and then I found her, that was huge. So Facebook is very important to me. Every morning when I wake up, the first thing I do, I check my Facebook page and I check the homepage and I see what my friends are up to. A lot of times news from Iran, before they even make it to international media, they are there on Facebook, and from people who are on the ground, from people who are there, from people who are present, from witnesses. So a lot of times I find things out on Facebook, and then it takes the media hours to get the news and to actually put it out there. So I totally, it is my community. A lot of girls from the high school and Shirvan Dadgar, the school I went to in Tehran, are on Facebook. So there is a community of us.
Fascinating how the world of social media has really brought people together.
It's amazing. Basically, to me, Facebook is a miracle. If it wasn't for Facebook, I wouldn't have been able to find all of them.
Well, we're almost out of time, but before we leave, what's next for you now? Another book?
Definitely another book. I started a work of fiction when I was actually writing Prisoner of Tehran. It was going really well, and Andre actually, he really loved it. So I love it too. So I really want to write it. Of course, now I will be on book tour, and I'm working on a couple of human rights cases. One of them is Sakineh Mohammadi Ashtani. The other one is a Canadian-Iranian named Hamid Qasemi Shal, who's in prison in Iran. Right now, he's in prison for 2 years, and he's on death row. So there are cases that I will be, working on until the situation in Iran changes. But next to that, I write poetry. So I'm trying to get a collection together to hopefully get a collection of poetry published sometime down the road, probably in a year or two. But also I will be working on my fiction. So I don't know when that will be ready. I have no idea, but these are the things that I will be working on. And of course, traveling again. You're traveling and speaking and just making the story, keeping the story alive.
And being a voice.
Absolutely.
Around the world. Well, we've come to the end of our show. It's been such a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So inspiring.
Thank you, Shannon.
So thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Now, where can people find your book? Again, after Terhan, her new book?
Well, the book is available everywhere, basically at independent bookstores, Chapters, Indigo stores, Amazon, anywhere, at your local library. If you don't feel like buying it, you can definitely go to your local library. A lot of online stores, everywhere you can find it. Just Google it and it will be there.
And for more information about you, do you have a website?
Yes, I do have a website. It is www.marinanemat.com.
Thank you so much for being here,
Shannon.
And talking about your new book and your life story. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
For more information about upcoming shows or to contact me, please visit my website at extraordinarywomentv.com. A special thank you to my friends and family for your ongoing support. And many thanks to you for watching Extraordinary Women on thatchannel.com, where you will hear inspiring stories that are transforming lives. I'm Shannon Skinner.